Daniel wasn't just a prophet, he was like a divine timekeeper. And the moment he died, the countdown began. This was the man who survived the lion's den, who interpreted dreams that made kings tremble, and who saw visions that stretched far into the future. When he closed his eyes for the last time, heaven didn't go quiet. In fact, something powerful began the moment his voice went silent. What if I told you that the most incredible prophecies in the Bible didn't end with Daniel's final vision, but only began after he was buried? From the fall of Babylon to the coming of the Messiah, from the return to Jerusalem to events happening in our world today, Daniel saw it all. And he didn't just see history, he saw our time, right now. But here's the mystery that still amazes believers and Bible scholars. In Daniel chapter 12, verse 4, God told him, "But you, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end." Why seal it? What was hidden? And more importantly, are we the generation meant to finally understand it? Later in this video, we'll look at one prophecy Daniel gave that might explain the confusion, chaos, and rapid change we're seeing in the world today. So don't go anywhere, because Daniel's story didn't end with his death. It's what happened after he died that changed everything. Daniel lived through the rise and fall of empires. From Babylon's golden days to Persia's growing power, he remained faithful, first as a young exile, then as a wise advisor to kings. He was respected for his honesty, his courage, and his deep connection with God. But when his time came, Daniel died quietly. No crowds, no farewell speech, just a faithful servant finishing his mission. But heaven didn't forget. Daniel's death wasn't just the end of a life, it marked the end of an era, and the beginning of a countdown that still echoes through time. In his final vision, Daniel stood trembling before an angel. What he saw shook him deeply, a time of great trouble, a final resurrection, and a last judgment. And then, the angel gave him a strange command. Daniel chapter 12, verse 4 says, "But you, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end." Seal it. Why would God hide a message from the very man he chose to reveal it? What truth was too great for Daniel's generation to handle? What message was meant for people in the future, maybe even us? The book was sealed, but not forever, and many believe that today we're starting to see it open, that the strange symbols and timelines Daniel once didn't fully understand are now starting to make sense. In the headlines, in world events, and even in the things happening around us every day. Daniel didn't live to see the fulfillment of his visions, but the last breath he took carried something eternal, a message that would travel far beyond Babylon or Persia, all the way to the very end of time. Long before the return home, long before rebuilding anything, and even before hope seemed possible, Daniel believed. He was just a young man when he was taken from Jerusalem. His city was destroyed, the temple burned, and his people scattered. But while others gave up, Daniel held on to a promise, a word spoken by the prophet Jeremiah. After 70 years of exile, God would bring his people back. As the years passed, Daniel didn't forget. Near the end of his life, he opened Jeremiah's scroll and realized the time was almost up. So he did what he always did. He prayed, not just once, not quickly. Daniel poured out his heart. He confessed the sins of his people and asked God to show mercy. That prayer is recorded in Daniel chapter 9. It wasn't full of demands, it was full of humility. And while Daniel was praying, God was already working. In 538 BC, something amazing happened. King Cyrus of Persia, a man who didn't even follow Israel's God, made a shocking announcement. He said that the God of heaven had told him to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem, and then he gave the order. Any Jew who wanted to return home could go. Ezra, chapter 1, verses 2 to 3 records his words. The Lord God of heaven has charged me to build him a house at Jerusalem. Whoever among you belongs to his people, let him go up. It was a miracle. No war, no rebellion, just a royal decree that fulfilled exactly what Daniel had believed and prayed for. But there was more. The prophet Isaiah had mentioned Cyrus by name almost 150 years earlier. And now Daniel's own people saw that promise coming true with their own eyes. Entire families packed up and prepared for a journey back to a land they had never seen, only heard about in stories from their grandparents. Daniel didn't live to see the return, but his words prepared the way. His prayers helped bring it to life. And that moment marked the first step in a chain of prophecies that were just beginning to unfold. The journey back to Jerusalem was filled with hope. The exiles had returned, carrying dreams of restoration and faith in God's promise. But when they arrived, what they saw broke their hearts. Jerusalem wasn't a city, it was a ruin. The temple, once full of worship and glory, was now a pile of ashes and broken stones. But they didn't come back just to cry. They came to rebuild. Led by Zerubbabel and encouraged by the prophets Haggai and Zechariah, the people started the work. They cleared the rubble. They laid a new foundation. And once again, prayers rose from the place where God's name had once been worshipped. It wasn't easy. Some of the older people wept when they saw the new temple beginning to take shape. It was nothing like Solomon's temple. No gold-covered walls, no ark, no visible glory, just simple stones and tired hands. Haggai, chapter 2, verse 3 captures the moment. Who is left among you who saw this house in its former glory, and how do you see it now? Is it not as nothing in your eyes? But God had not forgotten his promise. Daniel had already spoken of this in chapter 9, verse 25. He wrote that the rebuilding would happen in times of trouble. And that's exactly what it was. Enemies nearby tried everything to stop the work. They mocked the builders. They sent letters to the king of Persia, accusing the Jews of rebellion. For years the project stalled. But then God spoke again through Haggai. Is it time for you yourselves to live in your paneled houses, while this house lies in ruins? The people were convicted, and they got back to work. Finally, after 21 years, the temple was completed. It didn't shine like the old one, but it stood, and it stood on prophecy. What they didn't know was this: the second temple would one day be visited by the Messiah himself. Daniel hadn't just seen a building rise, he saw God's plan unfolding, one stone at a time. While life in Jerusalem slowly returned to normal, something powerful was happening far beyond its walls. The mighty Persian Empire seemed unshakable. It ruled the known world with strength and order. But Daniel had already seen what was coming next. Back in Daniel chapter 8, he described a strange vision. A powerful ram with 2 horns was charging across the earth. It crushed everything in its path. But then, from the west, a goat appeared, moving so fast that its feet didn't even touch the ground. The goat struck the ram with incredible force, breaking its horns and throwing it down. Later, the angel explained the meaning. The ram was Media and Persia, the two-headed empire. The goat was Greece, and the large horn between its eyes was Greece's first great king. That vision stayed sealed for over 200 years, until a young military genius named Alexander the Great rose from Macedonia. In his early 20s, he led an army west to east, conquering city after city. In 334 BC, he began his campaign. Just 3 years later, he faced the Persian king Darius III at the Battle of Gaugamela in 331 BC. The Persian army was massive, but Alexander crushed it. The Persian Empire fell. And suddenly, Daniel's vision wasn't a mystery anymore. It was world history. The goat had moved without touching the ground, just like the speed of Alexander's conquests, and the ram, once so strong, was broken. How could Daniel have known this would happen, centuries in advance? It wasn't chance. It was revelation. In fact, Jewish scholars living under Greek rule reportedly showed Alexander's generals the scroll of Daniel. They were stunned to see how clearly their own story had been written long before they were born. This wasn't just a prediction of empires rising and falling. Daniel had described who would rise, how they would conquer, and what would happen next. And that part was still to come, because Daniel didn't stop with the fall of Persia. His vision also showed what would happen after Alexander's sudden death. The rise of Greece wasn't the end of prophecy, it was the middle. The next part of Daniel's vision would bring not just political changes, but a spiritual crisis that would shake Jerusalem once again. Alexander the Great seemed unstoppable, young, brilliant, and fearless. He conquered more land than anyone had imagined. But then, suddenly, it ended. At just 32 years old, Alexander died in Babylon. No one expected it, no one was ready, and he left behind one of the largest empires in history, with no clear heir to take his place. What followed was chaos. His generals, once united under his leadership, turned against each other. Wars broke out, alliances shifted, and eventually the empire was divided into 4 major parts. Daniel had seen it all long before. In Daniel chapter 8, verse 8, the prophet wrote, "When the large horn was broken, 4 notable horns came up toward the 4 winds of heaven." That's exactly what happened. Alexander, the large horn, was broken at the peak of his power. And in his place, 4 generals took control. Cassander ruled Macedonia and Greece, west. Lysimachus took Thrace and parts of Asia Minor, north. Seleucus gained Syria and Babylon, east. Ptolemy ruled Egypt and Palestine, south. 4 rulers, 4 directions, just as Daniel had said. For the Jewish people living in the middle of it all, this wasn't just politics, it was prophecy. The same Daniel who had served Babylon and Persia had now accurately described the rise of Greece and its division. In Jerusalem, scribes and elders began reading Daniel's scrolls with new eyes. They realized this wasn't symbolic poetry, this was history written in advance. And it meant something else too. If Daniel had been right about this, then the rest of his visions might also come true, exactly when the time was right. But one of these 4 kingdoms would soon give rise to a king unlike the others, a man whose cruelty would test the faith of God's people like never before. Daniel had seen him coming too. He gave himself the name Epiphanes, meaning God made manifest. But to the Jewish people, he was nothing close to divine. Antiochus IV rose to power from the broken pieces of Alexander's empire, and from the beginning, his actions revealed his true heart. He wasn't just hungry for control. He wanted to erase everything that made the people of Israel who they were: their faith, their worship, their identity. At first, he meddled in the temple affairs, choosing corrupt priests who would obey him instead of God. But things soon became far worse. After suffering defeat in Egypt, Antiochus turned his fury toward Jerusalem. He entered the city with violence. People were killed in the streets. The temple was taken over. And in a moment that shocked the faithful to their core, Antiochus built an altar to the Greek god Zeus right inside the temple of the Lord. Then he did the unthinkable. He sacrificed pigs on the altar, something God had strictly forbidden. It was more than an offense. It was a direct attack on God himself. Daniel had seen this moment hundreds of years earlier. In chapter 8, verses 23 to 24, he spoke of a king with a fierce face, skilled in dark schemes, who would rise in the last days of a kingdom and destroy the holy people. Every word came true. Antiochus outlawed the Sabbath. He banned circumcision. He made it illegal to own or read the scriptures. Anyone who disobeyed was tortured or killed. Mothers watched their children murdered. Elders were forced to eat unclean food or die. It was a time of darkness that seemed like it would never end. But even then, the people remembered Daniel's words. In chapter 12, verse 2, Daniel had written that those who sleep in the dust of the earth would rise again, some to everlasting life and some to shame. That hope gave courage to a small group who refused to give in. From the hills of Judea, the family of a priest named Mattathias began to fight back. They weren't seeking revenge. They were fighting to keep the covenant alive. Daniel's vision wasn't just a warning, it became a lifeline, a fire in the hearts of those who still believed God's promises would never fail, even in the face of death. Victory didn't come easily. The fight against Antiochus had cost lives, families, and years of suffering. But finally, the Maccabees, those faithful warriors who had refused to let their worship be silenced, took back Jerusalem. They stood once again on the sacred mountain, staring at the place where God's name had once dwelled. What they saw was heartbreaking. The temple was ruined. Stones were blackened with smoke. Pagan idols still stood. The altar was stained with the blood of pigs. Silence filled the air where once choirs had sung praises. But they didn't give up. They got to work. They cleansed the temple from top to bottom. They tore down everything that had been defiled. They rebuilt the altar. They prepared to bring light back into the house of God. And then came the moment to relight the golden lamp, the menorah. But there was only one small jar of pure oil, just enough for a single day. Still, they lit it, and what happened next became a miracle remembered for generations. The flame kept burning, not for one day, but for 8, just enough time to prepare more holy oil. Daniel had seen this moment long before. In chapter 8, verse 14, the angel had told him, "It will take 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the sanctuary will be cleansed." And now it was. From that moment, the celebration of Hanukkah was born. Not just a festival of lights, but a testimony that God keeps his word. In the middle of fear, faith had won. In the middle of darkness, light had returned. And as the flame burned brightly in the temple once again, Daniel's vision was still unfolding, because another empire was already rising, one stronger and colder than anything the world had seen before. It didn't rise with dreams or poetry, it rose with iron. Rome didn't spread like the kingdoms before it. It didn't charm or inspire. It crushed. It conquered. Its soldiers marched with discipline. Its leaders ruled with power. Its laws reached into every corner of life. Where Rome went, it didn't just take land, it took control. And once again, Daniel had already seen it. In chapter 2, verse 40, he described a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, breaking everything in its path. And in chapter 7, verse 7, he saw a terrifying beast, unlike anything else, with iron teeth that devoured and trampled whatever was left. This wasn't like Babylon or Persia or Greece. It had no beauty, no elegance, just strength, fear, and control. And eventually, Rome reached Jerusalem. In 63 BC, Roman general Pompey entered the city. The Jewish people lost their independence. Rome took over. Its officials ruled. Its taxes drained the people. Its presence was everywhere, on the streets, in the temple courts, even in the hearts of the people who wondered if God had abandoned them. Herod, the puppet king, rebuilt the temple, not to honor God, but to impress Rome. It looked grand, but something was missing. The people felt the weight of oppression. They studied the scriptures more closely, and the more they read Daniel, the more they realized they were living in the days he had described. But Daniel hadn't just seen an empire. He had seen something greater hidden within it. In the middle of this beast, he saw a vision of hope, a Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven, given authority and a kingdom that would never pass away. It was a glimpse of something eternal, something the empire of iron could never crush. That moment was drawing closer. Rome was not the end, it was the stage. And the next prophecy Daniel had written, the one about the coming of the Messiah, was about to take shape right in the heart of this cold and brutal kingdom. In his later years, Daniel received one of the most detailed and astonishing revelations in all of Scripture. While praying about the future of his people, the angel Gabriel appeared to him with a message, one that included a timeline, not just about rebuilding Jerusalem, but about the coming of the Anointed One, the Messiah. Daniel chapter 9 verse 24 speaks of it clearly. 70 weeks are determined upon your people and upon your holy city. These were not literal weeks. They were symbolic of years, 70 sets of 7 years. And Gabriel explained that from the moment a command was given to rebuild Jerusalem, there would be 69 weeks, 483 years, until the arrival of the Messiah. And then it happened. Right on time, a child was born in Bethlehem. He grew up in a small town called Nazareth. And when the time was right, he stepped into history, not as a political leader or a general, but as a teacher, a healer, and a savior. He spoke with authority, he calmed storms, he forgave sins, he raised the dead, and he often called himself a name that sounded strange to some, but familiar to those who knew Daniel's writings. He called himself the Son of Man. Daniel had seen that title in chapter 7, verse 13. A divine figure coming with the clouds of heaven, given everlasting dominion. Jesus wasn't just quoting Daniel, he was identifying himself as the one Daniel had seen in his vision. But then came the moment that shocked even his closest followers. Daniel had also written in chapter 9, verse 26, "After the 62 weeks, the Messiah shall be cut off, but not for himself." And that's exactly what happened. Jesus was arrested, beaten, and crucified, not for his own sins, but for ours. As he hung on the cross, it looked like a failure, but it was actually the fulfillment of prophecy down to the very year. The temple veil was torn, the earth shook, and everything Daniel had seen became clear. The Son of Man was not here to destroy Rome. He came to defeat something much deeper, sin and death. The prophecy that had been sealed for so long was now wide open, and those who had ears to hear began to understand. This was not just history unfolding. This was heaven touching earth. But Daniel's vision didn't stop there. Another part was still waiting to be fulfilled, one that would come with fire, judgment, and the fall of the city that had rejected the very one sent to save it. It didn't take long after the death and resurrection of Jesus for the warnings to become real. Daniel had written about it centuries before. In chapter 9, verse 26, he spoke of a coming ruler whose people would destroy the city and the sanctuary. Jesus himself repeated the warning with urgency. Standing near the temple, he looked at his disciples and said, "When you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place, flee to the mountains." The signs were everywhere. Rome grew restless with Judea. The people were divided, some still waiting for a political Messiah, others following Jesus in secret. Tensions turned to uprisings, and then war. In the year 70 AD, Roman legions surrounded Jerusalem. The siege was brutal. Hunger and disease swept through the city. Families were trapped. Hope ran out. And finally, the Romans broke through. They set fire to the temple. The golden walls melted. The holy place was torn apart, stone by stone, just as Jesus had said it would be. Over 1 million Jews died. Those who survived were taken as slaves or scattered across the empire. The city of David became a graveyard. The temple, once the center of God's presence, was gone. This was not just a national tragedy. It was the fulfillment of everything Daniel had seen. The people of the covenant, once exiled to Babylon, were now scattered to the ends of the earth. This was the beginning of the diaspora, a global scattering that would last nearly 2,000 years. But even in the ashes, God was not done. Because Daniel's vision didn't end in destruction. It ended with a stone, not cut by human hands, striking the empires of men and growing into a mountain that would cover the whole earth. And as the dust settled over Jerusalem, that stone was already rising. Rome thought the story was over. The temple was gone, the city destroyed. The leader of this strange movement, crucified. His followers scattered, nothing remained. But prophecy said otherwise. Daniel had seen something different. In chapter 2, verses 34 and 35, he saw a stone, cut out without hands, that struck the empires of men and grew into a great mountain, a kingdom that would never be destroyed. That stone was already moving. After the resurrection of Jesus, his followers didn't vanish. They grew stronger. Fishermen became preachers. The uneducated spoke with wisdom. Persecuted believers refused to be silenced. Every time Rome tried to crush them, the message only spread farther. The gospel traveled from city to city, crossing borders and languages. It didn't spread through swords, but through transformed lives, through compassion, through sacrifice, through love. Martyrs sang in prison, churches met in secret, and everywhere hearts were changing. By the 4th century, something incredible happened. The very empire that had crucified Jesus and burned his followers, Rome itself, bowed. Emperor Constantine embraced Christianity. The cross, once a symbol of death, became a symbol of victory. Daniel's vision had come to life. The stone had become a mountain, and it was filling the earth. But this was only the beginning. Because while Daniel's visions had clearly spoken to his time and to the centuries that followed, some of his final words were sealed, waiting for a future generation. A time when people would run to and fro, when knowledge would explode. A time that may sound a lot like the one we're living in right now. Even after Daniel's death, his words kept echoing. Early Christians studied his visions with awe. They believed Rome was the fourth beast. They saw Jesus as the Son of Man, and they knew that the stone Daniel saw, God's kingdom, was already spreading through the world. But time moved on. New generations faced new trials, and still, Daniel's prophecies stirred hearts. In the Middle Ages, monks and scholars copied his scrolls by candlelight. Some believed they were already living in the last days. Others saw Daniel's timelines as puzzles waiting to be solved. Kings and commoners alike looked to his words in times of war, famine, and fear. During the Reformation, leaders like Martin Luther and others returned to Daniel's visions with bold new eyes. They believed Daniel had warned about religious corruption and false power. His words gave them courage to stand for truth, sometimes at the cost of their lives. And through it all, one verse kept returning. Daniel chapter 12, verse 4, "Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase." For centuries, people wondered, what did that mean? Was it symbolic? Was it future? And then, the modern age arrived. People began traveling the globe in hours. Information could reach anyone in seconds. Technology exploded. Knowledge, Real, measurable knowledge began increasing faster than ever before. Suddenly, Daniel's words didn't feel distant. They felt current. Each generation has read his book with wonder. But what if ours is the one meant to understand what was sealed? Because some parts of his vision were kept hidden until the time of the end. For centuries, people read Daniel's visions and wondered, how could this ever happen? But today, many of those same prophecies don't sound impossible anymore. They sound familiar. In Daniel chapter 12, verse 4, the angel said, "Seal the book until the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase." That time might be now. Today, people fly across the world in hours. Satellites orbit the Earth. The internet connects billions of people. Artificial intelligence grows smarter every day. Technology is advancing faster than our ability to keep up. Knowledge hasn't just increased, it's exploding. But there's another sign, one that's even harder to ignore. In 1948, after nearly 2,000 years of exile, the Jewish people returned to their ancient homeland. Israel became a nation again, just like Daniel had hinted, just like the prophets had promised. Then in 1967, they recaptured Jerusalem, the same city Daniel wept over, the same city at the center of his visions. For the first time in modern history, the pieces were falling into place. Jerusalem, the Temple Mount, the covenant people back in their land. None of it seems accidental. Daniel didn't just speak to Babylon or Persia or Rome. His visions stretched across time, into our time, a world filled with unrest, global tension, and moral confusion. A world where the foundations feel like they're shaking. Could it be that the scrolls Daniel was told to seal are now being opened? Because if his words spoke truth about kingdoms long gone, maybe they also speak truth about what's still ahead. And if we really are living in the time of increased knowledge and movement, then the final chapter of Daniel's prophecy may not be far away. Daniel didn't just see the future, he showed us that God is in control of it. Through every empire, every battle, every moment of silence or suffering, one truth has remained. Heaven rules. Daniel's life reminds us that no matter how dark the world becomes, God's light never fades. No matter how powerful a kingdom looks, it will fall. But God's kingdom, it stands forever. He saw the exile, the return, the rise and fall of empires, the coming of the Messiah, and a final kingdom that will never end. And now we're left with a question. Are we the generation Daniel was talking about? Have the seals started to open? Are we living in the time when knowledge increases and the earth trembles? If this video stirred something in you, if Daniel's story gave you chills, or hope, or hunger for more, don't keep it to yourself. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to know that God still speaks. And in the comments below, tell us, what part of Daniel's prophecy spoke most to your heart today? The scroll was sealed for thousands of years, but maybe, just maybe, it's being opened in your time.